Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I don't often get to spend a lot of time learning about other countries since I usually focus on the U.S., and I can't tell you how delighted I am that the United States is being included in a panel that is mainly about the developing world. Because rich as we are, I'm sure most of you know, we're so underdeveloped in many ways, and it's only fair that we be included among the countries here. Not only that, I think our country, through its lack of regulation of the financial system, bears some responsibility for setting off this particular crisis. On the other hand, the bubble should have been fairly obvious. It was in many places around the world, an unsustainable bubble, and we certainly had a lot of help in bringing it down. So, but in any case, I apologize for any role that we had. And I do want to say there is an amazing amount of similarity between the United States and some of the things I've heard about the other countries here this afternoon. I just want you to be sure to know a little bit about IWPR. We're basically a think tank. We produce research in the hope of impacting public policy, and we try to have a gender focus in everything that we do. What I want to do is give an overview first of women in the labor market in the United States, and then talk about some of the problems that we're having in this crisis and what the United States is trying to do about that. In many ways, I think the United States is kind of a success story for women. We've always thought of ourselves as one of the leaders in women's liberation, perhaps the first country which had a modern women's liberation movement, and we achieved so much. And you always, if you read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, you just know we're making fantastic progress. This chart just shows the increase over time in women's labor force participation. That would be this red dotted line down here. You can see it going up to about 2000, and then it's been leveling off since then. And the chart starts in 1978. For men, you see a different long-term trend, labor force participation falling long-term. I think this also is a sign of economic wealth, essentially. Men can retire, they can stay in school longer. We do have people that are out of the labor market, not of their own accord, but I think in general this long-term trend is a sign of increasing wealth. Employment to population ratios for men are a little, this excludes unemployment, and it's a little more volatile with the business cycle. Women's employment to population ratio, a little bit below the LFPR, also more volatile with the business cycle, but not nearly as much as men's. In other words, the long-term trend in women's increased employment held up until about 2000. So women weren't much affected in their employment by past business cycles in the U.S. One of the areas in which we're not a success, I'm indebted to Ariana Hegovich on the IWPR staff for this chart. The U.S. has the lowest labor force participation rate of college-educated women of any country in the, I guess this is generally the advanced world, OECD, I don't know, what do we call these countries, whatever, the wealthy countries. And I think this is largely because of the lack of accommodation for work and family that we have here compared to the other countries. So we may have started women's liberation, but we're sure and heck far behind now. This is showing you some racial differences in the U.S. Of course, the United States has a very diverse population, perhaps more diverse than almost any other country in the world, and we have the averages hide a lot of differences. And I'm fond of Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor, who used to say, on average I'm okay, but one of my feet is in boiling water and the other one is in freezing water. It doesn't mean that much, and so we want to try to look at these other groups. So for African American women, compared to all women's labor force participation, we can see that that's a bit higher than it is for all women. And for African American men, it's quite a bit lower. These men may be in the informal labor market. Many of them are in jail. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world now, bar no other country. We used to be able to point to Russia, I think, is worse than us, or maybe South Africa, but no, we're now the world leader. And so that is a problem. And among Hispanic men, you see them participating more than all men, and Hispanic women less than all women. So there's a greater gender difference among Hispanics and a smaller gender difference among African Americans. This is looking more at the employment to population ratios and the labor force participation ratios just since the last business cycle. These blue columns are the two business cycles. And you can see that, again, women's is pretty flat. It's pretty insensitive to the business cycle. Men's is more sensitive, especially it's these light lines that are the employment to population ratios, falling steeply for men here in this recession, and falling a little bit for women as well, not quite as steeply, but this is the first time ever that we've seen this big a dip in women's employment to population ratios. Why? Because in the U.S. we've had this secular increase of women going into the labor market. I like to say women are voting with their feet, and also they work in different sectors than men, which in general tend to be more insensitive to the business cycle, more steady. This is some data that you can't read, and neither can I, about unemployment. I'm not exactly sure what order these slides are in. This is kind of my fault. But we do have now about 13 million unemployed in America, so I was interested in that number as compared to China, where China has 20 million migrants, just the migrants unemployed, and 15 million new BAs each year. Thank goodness we don't have that. So anyway, we have 13 million unemployed. That's a lot. If you look at job loss, what this chart actually shows is that if you look at job loss, those who actually lost jobs, it's about 3/4 male in this country right now. But if you look at the unemployed total, it's actually still 42% female. Why is that? Because women are the disproportionate share of the new entrants and the job leavers and re-entrants. So if you're looking just at lost jobs, it's men disproportionately. But among the unemployed as a whole, it's only slightly less women. Women are 47% of the labor market and 42% of the unemployed. We also have very high rates of unemployment among female-headed households. Right now that's up to 11% for women who maintain families, and the unemployment rates are much higher for African Americans and whites. That's what that chart shows. This shows you something I referred to before, women and men working in very different sectors. Men are, 15% of men are in manufacturing, only 7% of women. 13% of men are in construction, only less than 2% of women. Women, on the other hand, are 34% of education and health services, 35%. Men are only 10% of men are in that sector. That sector is a relatively stable one, education and health services. And that's the main reason for women doing better in this recession, in the sense of losing fewer jobs. Another success story, equal pay improving. This is women's real wages since about 1960, very long term. This is men's real wages since 1960. A lot of people really don't know this about the U.S., but could you please observe this 1973 to 2009? What is happening to men's real wages in the U.S.? Zero growth. Absolutely zero growth. The reason, of course, women's has gone up. Why? Primarily increased human capital, more education, more work experience, and EEO laws, access to better occupations. But if you average those two together, which most people do, they don't use a gender lens, they think American wages have been rising overall. I think many people around the world will be shocked to know that really men's wages have stagnated. And one of the things I wanted to point out again about our diversity, this looks at men and women who have less than a high school education. You can see how steeply men's real wages have fallen in this education group. Again, women's have been rising recently, but after a dip. So women's are pretty level. Men's have fallen steeply. So we have a much less good return to those who are less well educated in America than we used to have. In other words, they are losing out. Here's the college-educated men, they're gaining, and the college-educated women are gaining. So all the gains among men have come only to the highly educated workers. I wanted to comment about the current crisis. I mean, in this crisis, we are seeing a typical pattern that unemployment is worst among minorities, worst among the less skilled. But there are also, in terms of unemployment, I haven't had a chance to look at it all, but we're also seeing a fairly big impact on new college graduates and young people, and that's not always typical. I wanted to comment on that added worker phenomenon that you saw in the other countries. I forget which of you pointed that out.